Hello everyone, my name is Olivia and welcome to a new episode of Books and Brews, a series on my channel where I recommend a couple of books that I've read recently while I drink a cup of coffee. I am drinking an iced coffee from Bones Coffee, one of my favorite coffee companies, and I'm so excited to drink it while I tell you about some amazing reads that I read in the beginning of 2024. If you want to see every single book that I've read so far this year, I have a previous video that I go into a little bit of detail for every single book that I read, so I will be sure to link that down below. But I'm going to go into depth for a couple of books that I read in the beginning of 2024 that completely changed my life, and I would highly recommend because all of these reads are so impactful and they're also different genres, so there's something for everyone here. So let's start with one of my most iconic reads of 2024. I think whenever I'm going to think of 2024 in the future, I'm going to think of this book, and it's Normal People by Sally Rooney. This was recommended to me on my birthday by a bookseller who told me I would fall in love with this book and I really needed to give it a try, even though I was hesitant to start it. So I finally caved and got the book because of that one bookseller, and I fell in love with this story, and it's quickly become one of my favorite books of all time. If you don't know what Normal People is about, it follows Connell and Marianne. Connell is a very popular boy in his school, and he secretly befriends Marianne, who is a loner, but they don't ever really share their friendship outside of the houses that they meet in and the little moments that they shared together outside of school. So initially we follow them in high school, and then we have occasional time jumps with each chapter of this novel where we get to follow them throughout their early 20s. And Normal People really impacted me because I do think it's one of the most authentic portrayals of what it's like to be in your 20s. When you're in your 20s, you are making mistakes. You're falling in love with people who may not necessarily be good for you, and you are falling into these friend groups where you may or may not feel like you completely fit in, and you are navigating so many different areas of your life in your early 20s. And Sally Rooney captures that perfectly with these two characters who form this codependency with one another, and they feel as though they are the only person that truly understands one another. And I even wrote in my Goodreads review, no one in their 20s is put together or knows where they're headed next. And Sally Rooney reminds us of the mess of it all. Sally Rooney explores this beautiful mess and area of your life that is so transitional. There are so many different things that are happening in your life. You're going to college, you're making new friends, you are escaping this suffocating part of your life that is high school, where you're so constrained to this one definition of yourself. And now once you leave high school, you get to start over again. You get to build an identity, and you get to watch Connell and Marianne build their identities. And it's interesting because you get to see from both of their points of views what they think about each other's identity. Do they like the person that other person's dating? Do they like the friend group that they're currently in? You get to explore all of that in Normal People, and I just was so in love with this story. I didn't even care that there weren't any quotation marks. I don't think that should be a deterrent for you for this book. I think the story is so strong and so raw and vulnerable that just completely outweighs the fact that there's no quotation marks. I fell into the stories so easily, I didn't even notice the lack of quotation marks, and Sally Rooney quickly has become one of my new favorite authors because I've loved every single book that she's put out so far. And I'm so excited for Intermezzo. I really want to get an arc of Intermezzo. I would love to film a reading vlog for it. The train passed by and I completely forgot what I was talking about, but 100% give this a shot. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and there are so many different ways you can interpret it, and that's what I love about this novel. There are so many different ways that people connect to this story, and I think it is totally worth a shot if you are considering picking it up. And if you do pick it up, please tag me anywhere on social media so I can hear your thoughts, because I would love to share the excitement with you. The next book that I have to recommend is a complete new favorite book of mine. I will not forget this book for the rest of my life. This book has just made such an impact on me, and I feel like you're going to know what I'm going to talk about. It is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. She is the author of the Bear and the Nightingale trilogy, which I also really enjoyed. But this is a standalone historical fiction following a brother and a sister, Laura and Freddie. Laura is a combat nurse during World War I, and Freddie is a soldier on the front lines of the war during World War I, and Laura is told that Freddie has recently passed away in the war, but she doesn't really believe it because there are certain elements in her life that are cropping up that makes her believe that he's actually alive. So she decides to take matters into her own hands to try and find her brother in the midst of this war. But what makes the story even more interesting is that it's not just a historical fiction. It does in fact have a paranormal element to it. So as we follow Freddie's point of view, he comes across a man who says he has the power to make the hellscape of the trenches disappear. And that's what introduces this blend of genres. So it's not just a historical fiction book, it's so much more than that. I like to pitch it as 1917 meets Hotel California by the Eagles meets the paranormal elements of The Diviners. So there's a lot happening in this book, and we follow Laura and Freddie on their two different journeys as they are navigating the absolute horror of World War I and the varying evils that crop up throughout their journey. And I think the way that Catherine Arden explores the way that war can really affect someone's psyche and soul is so fascinating because it feels so authentic. But I also really enjoyed the sibling dynamics because you can feel the love for both of these siblings through their point of view, and you can feel this desperate need to find one another again. And the story is just so well written. I underlined this book backwards and forwards, and the way that Catherine Arden writes and sets a scene just transports you there, and it makes you feel like you're watching a movie in your mind. It is so rare for me to find a book that completely demanded my attention, that took me on a journey, that changed my perspective and opened my eyes to a time in history that I didn't know a lot about, but I got to learn a little bit more through this book. I've never really read a historical fiction that explores war from such a close lens. I've read a lot of historical fictions that explore the effects of war on characters, but they're never actually physically in the war themselves. So being able to be on the front lines, to be in the trenches with Freddie was fascinating because it felt so urgent, it felt so dark. This story is a very dark story. It's an adult historical paranormal fiction novel, so there are really dark elements to this story, but it also just was completely awe-inspiring. Catherine Arden is such a talented author. I would put her up there with Madeline Miller. I think they both have very similar writing styles. Add it to your TBR, and again, tag me if you read it because wow. Wow! Now let's move on to a book that I listened to on audiobook that completely gagged me because the drama is delicious. And it is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, and this book is such a fascinating book. It follows a husband and a wife in Nigeria, and they are unable to conceive. So because they are unable to conceive, the husband decides to take on a second wife in hopes that she can provide him with an heir. So we follow the first wife, Yejide, as she is trying everything in her power to conceive before the second wife because she has this internalized duty within herself to provide her husband with an heir, because if she's unable to provide her husband with an heir, what can she really do as a wife? She's considered, in her eyes, a failure. So this story is so juicy because it explores secrecy, it explores marriage, it explores the duty of a woman, and it explores this overall sense of suffocation within a marriage because so many outsiders have opinions of how you should act and how you should be as a wife. When you have so many different opinions being thrown onto you, it really alters your sense of self, and you only ever see yourself as a wife. You only ever see yourself as someone who's supposed to provide something to your husband. And that exploration throughout this whole entire novel is fascinating because you get to see her go through so many different situations to try and have a child before this second wife. And the way that the story unfolds, I can't really get into it because there's so many different plot twists that happen, but when you're reading the book, you are completely gobsmacked by all the events that happen just because of this one need for a child. And the way that it unfolds was just completely entertaining. That's the best way I can put it. This is such an entertaining read, but also a really horrifying one because There's so many elements of this story that is horrifying and it feels so, again, suffocating. But one element that I really did enjoy was the interspersing of Nigerian politics into the story. So the story isn't really told in a vacuum. It is being affected by the Nigerian politics of the time, and you get to see that woven into the story. So as someone who isn't necessarily familiar with Nigerian politics, I was able to learn a lot more through this story. This is most definitely worth your time if you love a book with straight drama. The drama was there, it was palpable, it kept me on the edge of my seat. I was not bored once while listening to this book. Definitely worth your time. Then I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and Funny Story is officially my second favorite book by Emily Henry. I have Happy Place as my number one, Funny Place as number two, and the rest are just like the lowest tier I can possibly give, because I find Emily Henry to be a very polarizing author for me. I either love her books or hate her books, and it seems like I dislike more of her books than I enjoy them. But recently, with Happy Place and Funny Story, her two most recent novels, I found myself really enjoying those stories. Funny Story follows Daphne, who was recently dumped by her fiance a couple of weeks before their wedding, I believe, because he decided to leave Daphne for his best friend. And that best friend had a boyfriend named Miles. So Daphne and Miles are recently dumped because their significant others have gotten together. So Daphne, having no place to go, decides to move in with Miles because she needs a place to live before she can really get back on her feet and navigate this new life as a single woman, after just being dumped by this man who she thought she would live with for the rest of her life. Do you get it? Raise your hand if you get it. But it is such a heartwarming story between Daphne and Miles, who are navigating their lives after having a pretty significant breakup, and they are the only two people who really understand their situations because they're both in the same boat, and they eventually form this connection with one another, and they realize that they really balance each other out because Daphne is a very lonely person. She doesn't really have a place in her world because she made her fiance her world, and now that he's no longer a part of it, who is she as a person? But we also get to fall in love with Miles, who's a really sweet love interest. He's my favorite love interest by Emily Henry so far. I think his personality was wonderful, and I find that other love interests that Emily Henry creates always kind of feel one-dimensional, but I felt like Miles was a real person that I got to know, and he has such a quirky personality. He's a really sweet guy, and there is an element of this story that's introduced towards like the latter half that I don't really care for, and that's why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars, because that element just really took me out of the story and it felt outlandish, because I find that Emily Henry always tries to introduce something that's quirky, that's a little bit weird, and the element that she introduced towards the latter half of the story and these like handful of characters that just kind of jumped into the narrative felt so outlandish, and I didn't really enjoy it. If you know, you know. Let me know in the comments. But overall, I love the story. It was great. It was cute. I do think it would make the perfect rom-com because it just has all those elements. It has the banter, it has the characters, it has this really outlandish plot that can only ever work in fiction. It would make the perfect rom-com, and I saw someone fan cast Miles as Dylan O'Brien. I'm 100% on board with that. I do believe he would make a perfect Miles. But yeah, I really enjoyed Funny Story. It didn't live up to the hype that I had for Happy Place. That's like my number one Emily Henry book that I've ever read. I really enjoyed that story and really connected with it. But this one was also just really cute, and I just thought it was such a fun time. I also forgot to say that I cut my hair. It was feeling really stringy after a while, so I decided to chop like 3 inches of my hair off. So in case you were wondering, yes, I did cut my hair. But the last book that I have to recommend is 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. This was recommended to me by my friend Ariel, and she recommended this to me because she knows I love epistolary nonfictions, which are nonfictions primarily composed by letters. So we follow Helen's letters that she sends to this bookshop in in the UK because she finds that the bookshops in New York City where she lives doesn't really stock the books that she's interested in, so she decided to start writing to this bookshop in the UK, and they start this correspondence with one another where she asks them for a book, she tells them about her life, she asks them questions, and they write this curt reply to her because they're very professional and they're trying to maintain this professional air about them in their replies to Helen's letters. But over time, you get to see these booksellers form a deep friendship with Helen through the love for books, and you get to witness them over the course of years just really form this beautiful connection. And one of my favorite things about this book is that Helen is a hoot. She is so funny, she is so quirky and dramatic, and I had to search up her sign afterwards because I was like, she has to be a fire sign because the way that she speaks and the way that she like communicates with someone else is so dramatic and it reminds me a lot of myself, and she is in fact an Aries, and I was like, of course, she had to be a fire sign. But overall, this collection of letters is so cute because you can really see a friendship forming between these booksellers and Helen, and it's only ever really about the love for books, and it really invigorates you as a reader and makes you love books even more. It's just the perfect nonfiction to 1, read in a day, 2, break a book slump, but 3, remind you of the beauty and magic of books. And I did read this in one sitting and I really enjoyed it. And I do think this would be a really cute book to read. Maybe like you read a couple of letters before bed and it lulls you into sleep. But overall, I'm really happy I picked this up. I highlighted a lot because I really did enjoy Helen's letters. She was so funny and so spunky, and I really enjoyed reading the letters between the booksellers and Helen, and this was a great read. It's just a really sweet, cozy read, and I had such a great time with it, and I'm really happy that Ariel recommended it to me because it was right up my alley. And those are a handful of books that I've recently read that I think everyone should pick up. We have books from all different genres. We have contemporary, we have historical paranormal fiction, we have nonfiction, we have a literary fiction with normal people. There's something for everyone on this list. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you think about them. Recommend any books that you think I should read based on the books that I just recently spoke about. And if you want to follow me anywhere else on social media to keep up with what I'm currently reading and watching, my Instagram and TikTok are linked down below. If you're not subscribed to my channel, be sure to do so to see more videos from me in the future. And if you've stayed this far in the video, leave a coffee emoji down below so we can see who stays for the longest. If you do, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!